Uh, okay, so about myself, I'm from the first batch of IIST. So I graduated in 2011, after which I joined the aerospace flight dynamics group of VSSE. Uh, uh, then my contributions have been in the feasibility studies and mission design for advanced missions like RLB, Gaganyaan air breathing launch vehicles, two-stage to orbit launch vehicle sizing, spent booster recovery, and planetary entry. I've also worked on the development of software code for trajectory simulation, orbit design, as well as on the development of optimization codes based on gradient methods as well as global optimization strategies. Okay, so this is what I wanted to say. So I'll start my presentation now. Can you see the screen?
Yeah, we can see you.
Yeah, okay. And can you see the presentation?
Yeah, we can see the presentation.
Okay, fine. So the title of my presentation is a brief introduction to atmospheric re-entry trajectory design and analysis. So what uh, I was expecting here is that a lot of students might be from first or second years also. So I was tailoring my presentation for those students too. So if some of the concepts explained here are too simple for the final year students or maybe even the third year students and others, I apologize for that in the beginning. Okay, I'll get into it. So this is basically just the contents involved. I'll directly jump into it. Okay, now to introduce the topic, now boosting a payload into orbit involves addition of a huge amount of energy using a launch vehicle. Now to bring back the payload to Earth, you would have to reduce this energy, which is approximately of the order of 30 megajoules per kg if you are talking about a low Earth orbit of around 200-kilometer altitude. Now, reducing this energy through propulsion again is infeasible because, as you know, if you want to do that, you would need to have another rocket of the same size, a launch vehicle of hundreds of tons to do that. So, the most practical option would be to use aerodynamic drag for the energy dissipation. So, in order to do that, you would need to deboost the vehicle from orbit. That is, you would need to change its trajectory in such a way that it intersects the Earth's atmosphere or the Earth. And as it enters the atmosphere, the drag will dissipate the kinetic energy in a convenient fashion, in a slow enough fashion, if you design the vehicle properly. And then you can recover it on Earth. Now, visualization and comprehension of a variety of aspects related to entry trajectories can be done using the altitude velocity plane. Now, I'll start here with showing certain orbits in the altitude velocity plane. So if you look here, I have plotted certain circular orbits on the altitude velocity. Circular orbits will be a point in the altitude velocity, almost a point in the altitude velocity plane if you assume Kepler in dynamics. So you have a 200-kilometer orbit with approximately slightly less than 8 kilometer per second velocity. It remains at 200-kilometer altitude. A 300-kilometer circular orbit will be having slightly lesser velocity. That is what you see. Now, an elliptical orbit, since it moves between its apogee and perigee, where at apogee it has the lowest velocity and perigee at perigee it has the highest velocity, it appears as a line in the altitude velocity plane with the payload, basically the satellite moving up and down the line continuously. So that is how it would appear. Now, when you do a deboost maneuver, what basically happens is you're slightly reducing the velocity of the payload through some retropropulsion using a small amount of propellant. So, and by doing that, you can reduce its perigee arbitrarily. It is by giving different amounts of delta V using the deboost maneuver, you can reduce the perigee to whatever value you want. Now, for an example, if you see, if you start from a 200-kilometer circular orbit, if you reduce 15 meter per second velocity through a deboost maneuver, now its perigee reduces to 150 kilometers. So you see an orbit that 150 by 200 kilometer orbit like this in the altitude velocity plane. Now, if you can reduce 30 meter per second, it becomes 100 by 200 kilometer and so on. and if you reduce 60 meter per second, it becomes a 0 by 200 kilometer orbit. That is, its perigee would be at the Earth's surface. Now, whatever our orbits are plotted here, assume that there is no atmosphere. Now, this is what happens, is basically a pictorial representation of that. So a greater deboost delta V would correspond to a lower perigee of the deboosted orbit, which simultaneously would mean that the payload enters the Earth's atmosphere in a more steeper fashion, at a more steeper flight path angle. Now, when you have atmosphere, as the vehicle descends in altitude, it encounters aerodynamic drag and its velocity, its kinetic energy dissipates, its velocity decreases. And if the perigee is low enough, it will enter into the atmosphere and will never go back up. So that is what you see here. So where when you reduce 15 meter per second velocity, it just change into 150 by 200 kilometer orbit where there is no sufficient aerodynamic deceleration. So it remains as an orbit. But when you made it 100 by 200 kilometer orbit, it encountered sufficient aerodynamic deceleration so that it does not go back up along the same path. At least it goes back and then comes back and descends through the atmosphere. Okay. Now, if you look at these trajectories, the altitude profiles of these trajectories, you can see what happens there. The steeper flight paths lead to shorter descent times of flight. Okay, now if you look at the translational equation motion of an atmospheric entry vehicle, you will see that for a vehicle with no lift, that is only aerodynamic drag, that's the ballistic vehicle, a number called the ballistic coefficient, which is the ratio of mass and the drag area of the vehicle, that is what decides the trajectory characteristics, given that the trajectory starts from a fixed point. Okay, so what is a ballistic coefficient? It is basically a measure of how massive the body is, and it also gives a measure of how efficiently it will decelerate when it enters the atmosphere. So a feather would have a very low ballistic coefficient, and it would, and because of that, it would decelerate pretty quickly. While a lead ball, which has a high ballistic coefficient, would not decelerate as efficiently. Now, consider that the orbit that I showed earlier, that is which was deboosted into 100 by 200 kilometer orbit, and it entered the atmosphere, skipped up a little bit, and then went back down. Now, if this the entering payload had a lower ballistic coefficient, that means if you increased its drag area by increasing its surface area, or if you decreased its mass, or by doing both, it would decelerate much more efficiently, and the skip up part that you saw earlier wouldn't happen. So it would decelerate much more efficiently and come back down. So this happens precisely because when you have a lower ballistic coefficient, the bulk of the deceleration, here you have the drag deceleration plotted with respect to altitude for those two cases. So when you have a lower ballistic coefficient, the bulk of the deceleration happens at higher altitudes. So so there is a much more efficient deceleration happening. Now, the altitude profiles of these two are shown. So more efficient aerodynamic deceleration avoids skipping during entry flight. Now, okay. So the title is trajectory design. Now, there is scope for design only when there are certain constraints that need to be satisfied while the entry vehicle comes down, descends through the atmosphere. Now, the major constraints that guide entry trajectory design are peak heat flux, where heat flux, as you know, is proportional to the density, atmospheric density times cube of velocity, peak dynamic pressure, parachute deployment state. That may be a constraint in case of entry capsules which have to be recovered using a parachute. So parachute deployment has to happen at certain altitude velocity combinations, otherwise it will not be a successful endeavor. And in certain cases, you may need to have pinpoint touchdown, or like if you have a winged entry vehicle, you may need to land specifically at a runway. Even if you have a capsule, you may need to land close to a predefined location so that it can be recovered by a ship conveniently. So yeah. Now, the first three constraints, that is the peak heat flux, dynamic pressure, and drag deceleration, these can be plotted on this altitude velocity plane that I talked about. So as isolines. So if you see the red line, it is basically along this line you have 100 watt per centimeter square. That means if the vehicle is above this, it faces lesser heat flux. If it is below this, it faces a heat flux more than 100 watt per centimeter. So if your constraint is 100 watt per centimeter square on peak heat flux, all you need to ensure is that your vehicle flies above this particular line. And in the same way for drag deceleration and dynamic pressure. So to satisfy all those vehicle constraints, the entry vehicle's trajectory must stay above the constraints isolates. Now, how do you passively manage the vehicle constraints during entry flight? So, if you have the only option you have with you is a ballistic mode of entry, then to manage these constraints, you would naturally, entering from the same point, you would reduce the ballistic coefficient. That is, for example, if you see you have a trajectory here that of a entry vehicle that has a 500 kg per meter square ballistic coefficient, it violates all these constraints. But if you can have a vehicle which is having 25 kg per meter square, it will not violate any of these constraints. So this is a way of passive management of vehicle constraints. And when you talk about the parachute deployment, constraint on the parachute deployment stage, basically looks like this. Like you need to make the vehicle's trajectory pass through a particular region in the altitude velocity plane, because only in that region you can successfully deploy a parachute. Now, again, through management adjustment of ballistic coefficient, that is by designing the vehicle in a manner that it has low enough or a specific value of ballistic coefficient, you can make it fly through the parachute deployment constraint. Now, regarding landing location constraint, if you when you have a requirement to land at a particular downrange lying directly below your orbit track, you can adjust your downrange by beginning the deboost maneuver appropriately. That you can look at this figure. Like if you want to land at this point, so you can deboost appropriately so that the vehicle will land there. But if you want to land at a point that does not lie directly below your orbital track, that is when you want to have a cross range maneuver, a ballistic vehicle with a ballistic vehicle you cannot have any cross range maneuvers. So therein lies the problem. So if you look at the summary of the passive entry flight constraints management, you can see that almost all constraints can be managed through this passive means by designing the vehicle appropriately, but there is no cross range control possible. But then further, there can be situations where reduction of ballistic coefficient beyond a limit becomes infeasible. Say you need to bring a certain amount of payload and your vehicle cannot have more than a particular amount of drag area due to certain other engineering constraints or launch vehicle constraints and all those things. Then none of these vehicle constraints like heat flux, dynamic pressure, parachute deployment state can be satisfied passively. Similarly, when emergency deboost requirements crop up, like in a manned mission, when suppose due to a solar flare, expected solar flare, you're supposed to deboost as quickly as possible. You cannot wait for a time so that you will achieve your required downrange. When that situation comes, again, this passive management won't help. So thus, from the mission flexibility point of view, ballistic entry vehicles may not be able to satisfy some or all of the entry flight constraints. Now here comes the advantage of having aerodynamic lift. So here we talk about active management of entry constraints. So aerodynamic lift basically can be used to pull up an entry trajectory so as to ease vehicle loads like heat flux, dynamic pressure, etc., and also to achieve required parachute deployment states. It can be used to achieve cross-range control by modulating the pointing direction of the lift. Now, lift to drag ratio is the relevant measure of the lifting capability of an entry vehicle. Okay, now when you see how entry vehicles generate lift, so there are three, you can classify it into three basically. So with wings, so these are the vehicles that have the highest L/D ratios, typically more than one. That is, lift is always more than drag. Then you have the lifting body configurations which have mid-level L/D ratios, and then you have the ballistic capsule with the CG offset. That is, you distribute the mass within the ballistic capsule in such a way that it trims at a non-zero angle of attack, which naturally gives it a certain amount of lift, but such vehicles have very low L/D ratios of less than 0.3. Okay, just some really basic stuff. Okay, the magnitude of aerodynamic lift we can control through angle of attack, but since the low L/D capsules typically do not employ body flaps or other control surfaces, we do not have an explicit control on the angle of attack. That is, we cannot modulate the lift magnitude in flight. So if you have to take what you get, but with the winged vehicle, where you have option for a lot of control surfaces like body flaps or ailerons, angle of attack, real-time angle of attack control is possible. That is, you can change the magnitude of lift while in flight at a given trajectory state. Now, the direction of lift, as we know, is managed is a function of the bank parameter called bank angle. So this bank angle is basically the angle that the aerodynamic lift vector makes with the local vertical plane. So, by banking, you can distribute the aerodynamic lift between the vertical and horizontal directions, and hence simultaneously control both the cross range as well as the vertical trajectory. So, bank angle modulation is possible both in high L/D vehicles and low L/D vehicles, although the mode in which they achieve the bank angle modulation may be different. So, like for low L/D vehicles, typically you use RCS thrusters to modulate your bank angle. While in high L/D vehicles, obviously you would use ailerons, rudders, body flaps, etc., in order to trim the rotate the vehicle about the velocity vector and get a required bank angle. Now, okay, so to summarize that part, so by modulating angle of attack and bank angle during the descent flight, so the magnitude and direction of lift vector can be adjusted so as to obtain the required trajectory that satisfies all the constraints. So bank angle is typically the primary control parameter for the hypersonic phase of entry, that is above Mach 5, because angle of attack, even for winged entry vehicles, high L/D entry vehicles, is constrained by entry heating related requirements. So, okay. So these are the equations of motion written with respect to a velocity fixed frame of reference, relative velocity fixed frame of reference. So you can see how the cos component, that is L cos sigma, that is the vertical component of the lift vector affects the flight path angle, variation of flight path angle, while the horizontal component of the lift vector affects the heading of the vehicle. Okay. Now, when I had said that there are certain vehicle constraints during entry flight. So when you have lift, there is an additional constraint that comes into picture, which is called the peak load factor. So load factor is equivalent to the acceleration normal to the wing. So it is basically kept so that the wing loading for the entry vehicle remains within its design structural limits. So this is an additional constraint that comes into picture. Now, the putting this constraint also into the alternate velocity plane, this is how it looks like. Now we have one more soft boundary defined here, which is called the equilibrium glide boundary. Now this boundary is along this boundary, the lift magnitudes of lift and gravity are equal. So what this means is that if your vehicle goes above this boundary, your gravity is more than lift, and hence you won't be able to carry out a stable level flight above that. And below that, you have sufficient control capability with lift vector to move in whatever fashion you want. Okay. So basically, these constraints and the soft boundary of equilibrium glide define the entry corridor here. So when you design a entry trajectory, your trajectory has to remain within this entry corridor. And necessarily have to stay above the hard constraint limits. And this entry corridor is wider for vehicles with higher L/D ratios. Like Space Shuttle has a much higher entry corridor than, say, an Orion crew capsule. Okay. Okay. Now, looking at the effect of lift on vertical trajectory, just to go through that quickly. So, consider a ballistic entry vehicle trajectory here. So, since it has no lift, and because of the particular ballistic coefficient it has, you see that it violates all these constraints while descending through the atmosphere. But if you have lift along with it, say an L by D ratio of around 1 or 1.2, which is what I've taken here, with the full lift pointed up in the vertical plane. That is when you have a zero bank angle right from the beginning. So what you see here is that the trajectory oscillates about the equilibrium glide boundary, and then finally settles down onto it. So this is clear. Like if you look at it, it's much like a spring mass damper system. So as I said before, when you start above the equilibrium glide boundary, if your entry state is above the equilibrium glide boundary, the gravity will be pushing you down. That is like a spring action. Now, when you cross the equilibrium glide boundary and come down, lift will be greater than gravity. It will be pushing you up. That again acts as a spring constant. The damper in this case is basically the aerodynamic drag. So if you have a higher velocity, it will be damped because the aerodynamic deceleration will be higher. And the mass is basically the inertia of the vehicle. So this is what is key here. So it settles down around the equilibrium glide. Now, instead of flying with a lift vector pointed fully up in the vertical plane, suppose you have equal components of lift vector in the horizontal and vertical planes. That is, if you have a 45-degree bank angle, you would see the trajectory settling down below the equilibrium glide boundary. If you had a 90-degree bank angle, that is zero vertical component of lift, that is the whole of the lift pointed in the horizontal direction, then obviously the trajectory would be similar to the ballistic trajectory. Okay, to summarize, we know that by modulating bank angle, we can control the altitude velocity history of the entry vehicle's trajectory. So with looking at this aspect, the trajectory design problem can be defined as construct a bank angle profile with respect to velocity or time, whatever it is, such that the entry trajectory remains within the entry corridor described in the altitude velocity plane. So this is one aspect. So keep that in mind. Now, looking at the sign of bank angle, so look at these figures. It is obvious, it is clear that the sign of bank angle is irrelevant as far as vertical component of magnitude of vertical component of lift is concerned. And hence the vertical trajectory of the vehicle is concerned. So it doesn't matter whether you have positive 45 degree or negative 45 degree, your vertical trajectory, that is in the altitude velocity plane, is going to be the same. However, the sign of the bank angle determines the direction of horizontal component. So that determines in which direction your vehicle moves horizontally. So yes. Okay, so as an example, what I'm showing here is a trajectories of certain high LBD of a particular high LBD entry vehicle at various bank angles. So you can see what the intuition suggests. So with the higher bank angle, you have a greater lateral motion, and depending on the side, the lateral motion will be towards the left or right of the incoming trajectory, incoming zero bank trajectory. Also, you can see that when you have a bank angle, since the vertical component of lift reduces, so it will not travel as much downrange as the zero bank trajectory. Okay, and okay. So and these trajectories are shown in 3D here. Okay. So to summarize that part, now by modulating the bank angle, we can control the latitude longitude history of the entry vehicle's trajectory. So the trajectory design problem definition, again, from this aspect, we can say construct a bank angle profile that will ensure that the entry trajectory ends up at a predefined spot on Earth. Suppose this is a predefined spot, you need to design a bank angle profile that will get your vehicle to that point. Now, overall, looking at these two aspects together, the overall problem is construct a bank angle profile in which the entire trajectory remains within the entry corridor formed by the entry constraints, as well as simultaneously the trajectory ends up at a predefined point on Earth's surface. So this is basically the trajectory design problem put simply. Okay, so another concept that crops up here is that of the landing footprint. So basically, landing footprint is the set of all locations on Earth that the vehicle can reach without violating its vehicle load constraints, like heat, flux, dynamic pressure, and all that. So knowing this vehicle's landing footprint is important, because if you want to choose a point where the vehicle should land, you should know that the vehicle has the capability to reach there. So you need to be able to determine your landing footprint approximately in order to choose a in order to choose a point appropriately where the vehicle can reach. Just as in the case of vertical trajectory, higher LBD vehicles have greater cross-range control capability than lower LBD vehicles. That is shown by these two plots. So you can see the orders of magnitude difference between the footprint sizes of high LBD vehicles and low LBD vehicles. You cannot, it's clearly visible. Also, knowledge of a vehicle's landing footprint at every instant is essential in order to plan for exigencies, like, or in the case of, again, like if you have a manned mission and because of some emergency, you are supposed to deboost and come down soon, you need to be able to know where all you can land, what are the feasible areas where you can land, so that you can plan appropriately. So this determination of the landing footprint is also a part of the trajectory design problem. It is also tackled in similar ways as you would design a single nominal trajectory to a particular point. Okay, now solving the trajectory design problem. Okay. There are two routes to solve the trajectory design problem. One is the optimal control route, where you formulate the problem as an optimal control problem, after which you parameterize the necessary conditions for solution, which is basically Pontryagin's maximum principle, and pose it as a nonlinear programming problem. Now, and you can solve this nonlinear programming problem using parameter optimization techniques. This is a difficult route. People do use it, and in non-intuitive fashions, but it gives elegant solutions. The direct route would be to parameterize the control profile, that is a bank angle profile or angle of attack profile wherever applicable, as well as the trajectory states, and then pose it as a nonlinear programming problem, which again, like we said earlier, can be solved using parameter optimization techniques. So this is a more straightforward solution, but of much less elegance. Now, we have said about nonlinear programming problems. So basically what we're saying is that the entry problem is transcribed into a nonlinear programming problem, and then you solve it using parameter optimization technique. So let's just speak about what are nonlinear programming problems. Basically, it involves finding the maximum or minimum of a function subject to certain constraints. Specifically, this is the problem definition. Say you have a certain set of control variables, say x1 to xn, and there is an objective function and a constraint function. Based on the values of these control variables, you have an objective value, and also based on these control variables, you have a set of constraint values. Now, the constraint optimization or nonlinear programming problem can be stated formally as minimize the objective function by suitably selecting the appropriate values for x1, x2 up to xn, subject to all these constraints. They may be equality constraints or they may be inequality constraints. Now, this is the nonlinear programming problem. If your design problem, any problem for that matter, but any design problem, and in our case, specifically the entry problem, if you can transcribe it as an NLP problem, that's a nonlinear programming problem, it can be solved using a wide variety of parameter optimization techniques like genetic algorithms, differential evolution, particle swarm optimization, all of which are global optimization techniques. Then there are sequential programming, Lagrange multiplier methods, etc., which are gradient-based methods. So you can use these algorithms to solve. You don't need to understand these algorithms completely in order to solve them. Ready-made codes are available in almost all scientific computing libraries, MATLAB or Python, C++. You will be able to solve. Now, how do you transcribe the entry trajectory design problem as an NLP problem? So I'll just show one simple example of a direct route for the solution. That is where you parameterize the control parameters alone. So this is how it is. We know that the trajectory depends on a particular bank profile. our objective is to find the bank profile which satisfies the trajectory constraints as well as maximizes or minimizes some objective function. Suppose we parameterize our control history in a particular fashion, say with n number of parameters, say sigma 1, sigma 2, up to sigma n. So that is, if you have these n numbers, you can construct the bank profile, okay, in some manner. So if you have that, just by feeding in these numbers, you can generate the bank profile, and with the bank profile, you can carry out a simulation of the trajectory by numerical integration. So once you simulate the entire trajectory, from that you can get your error in landing location, which could be your objective in the case of a single trajectory design. And you can also get the peak heat flux, load factor, dynamic pressure values that are coming out of that trajectory, which are the constraints. So now what we have done is that we have transcribed the entry trajectory problem into an nonlinear programming problem. That is, you have a certain number of variables which go as input into a computation. Here that computation is basically a trajectory simulation, and which returns your objective function and your constraint values. Now, this sort of a route for solution of your solution of your entry trajectory problem is easy to implement and execute, but it is computationally expensive, because when you link it to an optimizer will try a variety of values of these input parameters, and for each combination of these input parameters, it will have to do a complete trajectory simulation, a trade-off trajectory simulations, typically, in order to get the objective and constraints. So this is computationally expensive. So I'll show why that is so. So like I said, this you have posted as an NLP problem. So when you give it to an optimizer, what happens is that you give the optimizer an initial guess of the solution. If it is a gradient-based optimizer, if it's a global optimizer, you don't need to give the initial guess. It will automatically choose initial guess. Now you give this initial guess of the solution to the optimizer. The optimizer feeds in this initial guess, simulates the trajectory, gets these constraints and the objective function value, and based on the value it gets, and by perturbing the initial guess slightly, it does some computation based on which it will keep on playing with these inputs. It will, in a particular fashion, a mathematically relevant fashion or a heuristically relevant fashion, it will play with these inputs in order to maximize or minimize the objective. In this case, minimize the objective, that is error in landing location, so that the vehicle lands at a particular point, and while satisfying these constraints. So at the end of that optimization process, which may go on for a lot of iterations, you get the optimal solution. That is the bank profile which satisfies our objective, which maximizes or minimizes our objective and satisfies our constraints. So this is how it works. So the reason it is expensive, this mode, that is a direct route through the direct shooting, is expensive, is because the optimizer will have to run a trajectory simulation each time you change your bank profile. Now there are other modes of direct solutions that don't that are not this computationally expensive. In those methods, you discretize not only the control profile, you discretize also the trajectory. So those are called collocation methods. In fact, there are a lot of methods. These are just the basic things that you come across when you learn about trajectory, re-entry trajectory optimization. Okay, now coming to the part where you actually fly an entry vehicle. Okay, so we have to state this. Super accurate prediction, pre-flight prediction of an atmospheric entry trajectory places an overwhelming burden on trajectory modeling and simulation. Okay, this is because, like, say, even if you have very high fidelity models for your vehicle characteristics, say you know that your vehicle's lift and drag are going to be so and so at so and so altitude, so and so Mach number. If you know that very accurately, you know the planetary atmospheric characteristics very accurately. Suppose you model your gravity fields very accurately. Very higher order models you are using, suppose. Even then, the chaotic uncertainties in the atmospheric properties like gust, density gradients, and winds will prevent you from prevent your prediction from matching closely with the actual flight. Okay, like for an example, Yeah, even small dispersions in your vehicle characteristics of the order of less than 10 small but consistent perturbations in the modeling parameters can lead to tens or even hundreds of kilometers of error in the landing location if you don't change your control profile. So what I'm saying is, you design your bank angle profile using your high fidelity models and everything, and you say that with this bank angle profile, you fly your trajectory, you're going to reach a particular point, your constraints are going to be satisfied. But now when you actually fly it, there are going to be unmodeled perturbations that are coming into picture, which will lead your vehicle to a significantly different point. Uh, so what you need here in order to what you need here is not more modeling. What you need here is closed loop trajectory control. So when you actually fly an entry vehicle, when you are going into the actual flight, you need to have a closed loop guidance algorithm for correcting for your errors that happen due to unmodeled disturbances. Okay, so I'll just uh, formally state that. So basically, the closed loop guidance is for achieving precise landing of an entry vehicle from a given entry condition without violating the vehicle's constraints on heat flux. Yeah, I think my 40 minutes is over. I'll take a few more minutes just to complete. Okay, so without violating the vehicle's constraints on heat flux, while automatically correcting trajectory deviations due to atmospheric uncertainties in vehicle aerodynamic coefficients, mass, etc., approximations in trajectory modeling and simulation. So typically, this is done in the following fashion. When the vehicle is flying, instantaneous state of the vehicle is sensed by the navigation system every few seconds or so. Based on the current state of the vehicle, a complete or partial trajectory simulation is done within the vehicle's computer uh, 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 in order to get the end conditions and path constraints. So if there is any error in the predicted end conditions from what the simulation suggests, or any predicted violation of path constraints is expected, then the future bank profile of the vehicle is modified appropriately so that those errors are corrected. So some closed loop guidance algorithms for entry vehicles are based on planning and tracking of drag deceleration profiles, some predictor corrector methods, quasi-equilibrium like these are terms that you will find regarding entry trajectory in papers related to entry trajectory design analysis. Okay. Uh, Okay, okay. I wanted to go through the drag deceleration tracking parts, but since I don't have time, I'll just skip that and I'll just go to this part. So, if you consider high LBD vehicles, there are three phases in the entry trajectory of high LBD vehicles. First is the hypersonic phase where you have bank angle modulation alone. By the time you reach around 25 kilometer altitude at Mach 2.5, you are around 70 to 100 kilometers from the runway, from where you start the terminal area energy management phase. So this is the phase where your entry vehicle behaves like an airplane. So here what you do is you change the heading of the vehicle, align it to the runway, align it and bring it behind the runway and reduce its velocity, its energy sufficiently so that it can go in and land into the runway very comfortably. So these two phases, last two phases, have angle of attack as well as bank angle modulation involved. Now, similarly, if you look at low LBD vehicles trajectories become significantly vertical by the time you reach the supersonic and transonic phases. So you don't have any option, even though you have a small amount of lift, you cannot play around much with it. It's not going to give you much trajectory maneuverability. So by the time you reach subsonic flight, you will be deploying a parachute. After which you have no control over where the vehicle goes, where the winds take you, you go there. So that's a terminal descent phase, and it splashes down or touches down in the ocean or the land as the vehicle is designed. Yeah, so this is part of it. Okay, thank you. So this is all I have.
So thank you, Jyotish. It was quite wonderful, actually. Uh, so
yeah,
you
thank
tried
you.
to, yeah,
Yeah.
you try to cover, a lot of ground, I think. So if
Ah,
I think there must be a lot of questions from students. So we'll first, I mean, I also have actually questions, but we'll first give
okay.
preference to students. So does anyone have any questions? Yes, go ahead, Padmanabh.
Yeah, Jyotish, I have one
Yes.
question. So,
Yeah.
in the case of high lift vehicles, is there
Yes.
anything that prevents us from doing instead of having landing gear and runway on which we have to land like an airplane, can we
Ah.
instead use parachutes and land vertically down, even with a high LBD vehicle? Why are we
Yeah.
going towards landing gear type of aircraft things?
Yeah, you can definitely do that, but then you don't need to design that vehicle in that particular fashion. See, the reason why you are having landing gears and you are making all the wings and all this, that you want to have a pinpoint landing. So if you land with a parachute, you're going to splash down somewhere. There's going to be a minimal level of inaccuracy in where you're going to land. Then recovery logistics have to be involved to bring the vehicle back to your processing area or something like that. But if you have a winged entry vehicle, you have the capability to achieve pinpoint landing at a runway. So that is the best thing that you can have. So that is why you do that. If you're okay with recovering it with a parachute, then you don't need to have wings. That is the point. You can have maybe a lifting body configuration, because having wings and all basically increases the design effort that goes into the manufacturer as well as structural design of the vehicle.
Yes. I have a follow-up question. So with the
Yes.
parachute, what is
Yeah.
the sort of uncertainty in the landing area? Is it in kilometers or is it?
See, the thing is, if with your low LBD vehicle, the kind of maneuverability you have is pretty less. Okay, but still you can correct your errors, like maybe to the order of a few kilometers or so. But once the parachute is inflated, now the parachute has a huge amount of drag compared to the vehicle, and there is typically generally no steering option is available with the parachute. People generally don't use steerable parachutes. So what happens is that even low velocity winds can drift your parachute with the vehicle to areas that you don't know. You can't really predict it before, but probably, yeah, it could fall in the order of tens of kilometers, depending on the design. Yeah.
Okay, okay. So we have next question from Balaji.
Hi, Jyotish.
Hi.
See, I have two questions. First
Okay.
question is like you said when you do this active banking control,
Yes.
like due to chaotic, unprecedented or unmodeled sources,
Yes.
you'll be running either partial or complete simulation again on board, right? So definitely that won't be high fidelity, isn't it? There will be low fidelity models.
It will be low fidelity, yes.
So how good are these low fidelity models like when compared to you do this?
Ah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Okay, I'll ask the second question later. Yeah.
Okay, actually, the thing is that even though the model is low fidelity, since you are applying it continuously till the end, right? You're applying it again and again. See, low fidelity models are accurate for short amounts of time, for in the immediate vicinity or for a few tens of seconds ahead. They are pretty accurate. They are not accurate for predicting the entire trajectory, but they are accurate for a small amount of time. So by repeatedly applying this by doing this every few seconds while in flight, you will be able to achieve pinpoint landing. In fact, for example, the space shuttle uses a very low fidelity analytic model for their closed loop guidance algorithm, which is based on the planning and tracking of drag deceleration profile. So the thing is that if you look at the simplified equations of motion of an entry vehicle, you will see that you can form a relation between the range traveled by the vehicle and the drag versus energy profile. So what it means is that if you have a particular drag versus energy profile, your vehicle will follow a particular amount of range. So this is a very low fidelity model. It's not that accurate, but the space shuttle uses this algorithm repeatedly. Every few seconds it is applied in flight. It is in fact applied during its hypersonic phase of flight, at the end of which it gets a pretty good accuracy.
Okay. So I have one
Yeah.
question which is not directly involved in your presentation, but so
Okay.
you're a practical engineer. I mean, yeah, in ISRO.
Yeah.
So when you refer the research papers, which are both from academia and industry, like what do you feel like they are really incoherent with whatever the research done by academia? Is it useful for applicable in terms of applicability for research in practical sense?
It depends. We cannot uniformly say that none of the academic papers are applicable for industry or the other way around. There, it depends on the people, on the kind of depends actually on the paper. So I have seen both kinds of papers, which are like directly valid for industrial application, or which are like very far-fetched, have no relation to industrial application.
Okay, thanks, Jyotish.
Thank you.
I think next question is from Nitish.
Devendra, I have a comment. Just I want to.
Sir, go ahead.
Yeah, Jyotish.
Yes,
I have
sir.
a comment on your one of your slides. You said
Tell
the
me.
solution approaches. You said two. There are two. One is optimal control route. Other one is direct route. You said that's fine.
Yes.
But
Yes.
both of them, you actually were advocating non-linear programming only in under both. Actually,
Yes, sir.
control route, there is another way of approach. You can always go for adjoint variables, co-state variables. Control variable can be, you mentioned the Pointryagin principle, but you went for NLP. Actually, Pointryagin principle's main idea is to avoid this type of NLP approach, which gives a continuous, elegant solution, as you mentioned. That's one comment I just want to. Okay.
Yeah, true, sir. Yeah. True.
Yes. So, so is it possible to use this indirect approach with constraints that you have? Do you see for launch vehicle?
Yeah. Yes, definitely. May not be very straightforward. Do that. There are a lot of research papers that explicitly work on these indirect methods. Very advanced papers.
Okay. So Nitish, go ahead.
Yeah, so my question is that in low LYD vehicle capsules, like, is there any possibility of having angle of attack and bank angle modulation?
Yeah, you could have it. Like, theoretically speaking, if you want to have angle of attack control, you need some way to trim the vehicle at those different angles of attack. Typically, low LYD vehicles are made in such a way that you have a passive mass distribution inside, an asymmetric mass distribution inside, so that it trims at a single angle of attack at a particular Mach number. But if you have a small control flap or something outside the vehicle, something designed in such a way that you can trim the vehicles at different angles of attack, you can definitely modulate its angle of attack also, theoretically. But we don't. I'm not very sure like how practical that is.
Okay, thank you.
Within a bound angle of attack, we fix a range. Within that, it is possible. People have done that actually.
Yes.
Within a range, as you said, you cannot have any angle of attack. But suppose 35 gives the best thing, then you can do always between 32 and 38 or 40. Small, just in the neighborhood of that, you can vary. It will give better performance than bank alone. That's the. And actually, in fact, Mac Bhatnagar, he worked on your trajectory code, and then he included both bank and angle of attack modulation. Yeah.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So next question is from Alex Jones.
Jyotish, can you hear me?
Yeah.
See, what are the inputs that are used for your re-entry state vectors? Is it just ballistic flight path angle and ballistic coefficient?
The inputs, basically, you would need the trajectory states, which would include 3 location position parameters and 3 velocity parameters. Along with that, you would need information about the vehicle characteristics. Basically, its lift and drag coefficients, how it varies with respect to Mach number, how it varies with respect to angle of attack. And then, obviously, you would need atmospheric properties and all those things in order to carry out all these studies.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think Aditya, go ahead.
Yes. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So my question was, in low LBD vehicles,
Yes.
we had this parameters of angle of attack and bank angle modulation, right?
Yeah. Okay. What I said was low LBD vehicles typically use only bank angle modulation. Typically, yeah.
Means the range is very small in these cases, so that gives a very less landing footprint to us. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. But that is mainly because the lift magnitude that you get from a low LBD vehicle is smaller. You have a lift LBD ratio of 0.3 or lesser. So the amount of the magnitude of force that you get for basically correct modulating the trajectory is less. Yeah. Bank angle, you can achieve any bank angle. Doesn't matter. You can achieve 0 to 180. No issues.
Actually, I was thinking, will there be a parameter for roll? The roll of the, suppose a capsule. Will that can that affect the heading of the capsule in the trajectory? We can change the location of landing using the roll. You can change the way it moves in the entry. It can move to the left or the right like that while rolling. We can use that as a parameter to change the landing position.
Yeah, you see, this bank maneuver is basically a combination of roll and yaw. Thing is, with the when you roll the vehicle, right? So see, what you want is for your trajectory modulating force for its direction to be changed. That is what you want. Now, if you have a particular angle of attack, say if you simply roll the vehicle, you are not going to turn the lift vector in the appropriate direction just like that. But if you roll and yaw, what you do is you maintain the same angle of attack while changing the direction. So you keep the lift magnitude the same and then simply change its direction. If you simply roll, you may not be able to do that.
Okay, means will that give us a wide range of landing footprint? Can that be possible?
No, no, like I said, roll alone will not give any sufficient advantage. Whatever you get from bank angle control, I don't think anything else will give better than that, other than angle of attack control.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, I think Padmanabha wants to go again.
Yeah, so since you introduced us to closed loop control and guidance and onboard guidance, which use low fidelity models.
Not necessarily, but many of them use low fidelity models.
Okay, yeah. So, so is it possible to offline on ground conduct a huge number of simulations and learn the dynamics using something, let's say, using machine learning or artificial neural networks to learn the dynamics of the whole landing system about the nominal trajectory and some perturbed levels based on whatever aero gravity models are available, and then just feed the neural network as a controller for the vehicle? What is your opinion and pros and cons of that?
Possible, certainly possible. But then like you have to test the guidance strategy with this neural network extensively. With the same neural network, you have to do a significant number of Monte Carlo simulations also to ensure that the neural network itself works properly.
Like Padmanabha said, so using an ANN is basically creating another surrogate model or another low order model. So have you seen any publications basically, because the amount of data that is required to train the model to accurate level is huge. So is it possible? Have you seen?
No, I have not come across any, but I'm sure there are many out there. I've not worked on or gone into any depth in ANN being used in trajectories.
All right.
I have one second. This Padmanabha was mentioning about some guidance. Actually, we use polynomial guidance. That is called polynomial guidance, right? Or there is one such thing which is just based on large number of simulations, all that. And in fact, we used for Chandrayaan 2 landing some such landing guidance only. But it has got its own limitations. As you said, what is large number of simulations? It's really a big question, always remains. How do you define that large?
Yes. Okay. Next question is from Balaji again.
Jyotish,
yes.
so like as Padmanabh was asking about the simulation, is there any facility that not just in India, even abroad, like who does hardware in the loop simulation for this kind of this thing? Like you can create
Yes,
a Martian,
there is.
you can create that atmospheric environment kind of like in some.
Okay, there are hardware in loop simulations which put the actuator and all involved in the vehicle as part of the simulation. But okay, regarding so in like space industry terminology, when you say hardware in loop, you don't typically mean that you simulate the atmosphere.
Yeah.
So I don't know of any such facilities.
Okay. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, I think we'll take the last question from Vijit, and any further questions can be, we can do on offline. Okay, go ahead, Vijit.
Yeah, this is not a question actually. Actually, this is a reply. I mean, just adding on to the point where Padmanabh told whether we can use machine learning for guidance. Actually, what I read somewhere is what happens is troubleshooting becomes an issue. That is in practically what we do when we see a unexpected behavior of the guidance in our regular guidance, we know what to tune, what gain parameter to tune. But in machine learning, when we see unexpected behavior, we don't know which training data must have caused that unexpected behavior. So troubleshooting is one of an issues which people have faced, and I think if we can try to find a solution to that, then certainly I think machine learning we can think of using that. That's what I read somewhere.
Yeah, Devendra, can I just ask? I'm Satish here. It's one question. Okay. So actually, this is like, so if you have this high LBD ratio vehicles, the constraints are likely to be more stringent than that for a low LBD vehicle, right? Actually, I'm asking this in the context of space shuttle, now that they've reverted back to a low LBD configuration from the space shuttle. So can you comment on this? Like,
yeah, actually, regarding the space shuttle, why they have gone back is not specifically because of the entry constraints. It's because of the fact that the space shuttle was made in a devised off in at a time when material technology wasn't so far ahead as it is now. So I don't think low LBD vehicles are better than high LBD vehicles for because we look at the shuttle example. Shuttle example is very specific. It's only because of really old technology, material technology being used in a winged entry vehicle. It is difficult to make a winged entry vehicle. It is difficult to test. It is difficult. It is definitely, it has a lot of advantages over low LBD.
So now you feel it is practically economically feasible option.
It is possible. Many people are doing it. Okay, the actual material related, what is that? The state of the art of that and all that I cannot really comment upon, but definitely more and more people are getting into it. Even China recently launched a winged configuration experiment. And US has been continuously doing experiments with its X-37. So, yeah, it is certainly the way forward in some areas at least.
Okay, thank you.
And actually, ESA is experimenting with hyperplane. One hyperplane concept is there. They are also trying actually. It's still not given up.
Okay, sir. So I think I have one last question. So both for Ramanand sir and Jyotish. So I know Ramanand sir actually uses differential evolution. I mean, at least for last 3-4 years for optimization. So I want to know, Jyotish, I mean, are you using differential kind of global optimization algorithms for the NLP, or gradient optimization that you mentioned in the last SQP is the preferred option?
Okay, actually both have its advantages and disadvantages. I had been using gradient-based optimizers since I joined ISRO, but recently, since a couple of months back, I too have been using differential evolution, because I have been hearing of differential evolution more and more people coming out of IIST, probably thanks to Ramanand sir. So I have found that differential evolution is really good. Like for my purposes, like when I use a gradient-based optimizer, I need a good initial guess to get the proper solution or somewhere close to a global solution, which is a very difficult thing to do. But if you use differential evaluation to get a good initial guess, you can feed it into a gradient-based optimizer and get a really quick solution. So a hybrid sort of method is what I have been following now because I chanced upon differential evaluation.
That's good. Yes. Yeah. Actually, differential evaluation, if my memory is correct, Madhav Nakani is there. I don't know. He's the person who first started using that actually. Madhavan. Then before that, we used PSO, GA, all that. Then I tried with Madhav Nakani differential evaluation. I found it's very simple. It does a very efficient job in very less than 100 lines code. Not more than that. Very simple. It does the job actually. It is one of the beautiful, simple, efficient method. Yeah.
Okay. I think Jyotish, because we've answered all questions, so there is one more question from Mayank. It is in the chat actually. Could you take it?
Okay. No, I didn't really get the question. Mayank's audio, you'll be able to.
Hello, Jyotish sir, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible. Tell me, Mayank.
Good evening, everybody. So what I'm asking is, we see government-based agencies such as ESA or ISRO or NASA going with a capsule-based human transportation system. However, other agencies like SNC's Dream Chaser are still pursuing the twin body concept of either RLB for payload insertion or for human transportation system. So from a system engineering point of view, is there actually some benefit between the two of the modes with respect to performance?
See, performance-wise, thing is, if you can develop a good winged entry vehicle, that definitely will give a much better performance in all respects than a low LBD entry vehicle. So it's just a matter of whether you are able to design and realize one. So that is, I feel, more of a technical problem, more of a management problem than a technical problem. The same way that, booster recovery was thought to be impossible a decade ago, and SpaceX is doing it. It was thought to be impossible mainly because it involved mobilization of a lot of resources, human resources, a lot of ideas had to come in, and everything had to gel well for that to occur. Now that has happened. So it was not really a technical problem, it was a management problem, I feel. The same way a winged entry vehicle is also why, to be able to achieve it, you have to crack the management aspect of it. Technical aspects will naturally come in place. That's what I feel.
One thing is there, risk factor is higher in winged vehicles compared to other lower LBD. I mean, for humans, when humans are flying, the risk factors are little higher in this type of winged vehicles. That we cannot.
Yes.
But of course, with real care and simulations and testing, we can quality assurance. We can certainly come out of that. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Okay, so I think thank you, Jyotish. This was a wonderful presentation, and you can see from the number of questions that how well you engaged the audience. I think this is a good precedent. This inaugural lecture was actually in the right spirit. So I thank all the alumni members who actually actively participated and are going to participate in future also. And I look forward to seeing you all in a couple of weeks' time with our next lecture. So I will post the poster and all the information on the website. So if you don't receive an email, you can always check the website, and it will definitely be updated before the next lecture. Thank you, Ramanan sir.
Thank you all. Yes, thank you, Devendra, Satish, and all my students. Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay,
We continue to interact.
all right.